Chief Ayoka had been buried 85 times in 3 months. But every morning, the villagers woke up to find his coffin sitting back in his living room, wide open and waiting.
The village of Emumu was tired. For 3 months, nobody had gone to their farms. Nobody had celebrated a wedding. They were stuck in a loop of grief because Chief Ayoka, the wealthiest and most stubborn man in the village, simply refused to stay in the ground. Every single time, the villagers would dig the grave, lower the coffin, cover the earth, go home and sleep. And every single morning, they would wake up to find his coffin sitting back in his living room, wide open, waiting. There was even one day they dug the grave 6 feet deep and water started gushing from the ground. Just pure cold water rising up to meet them. They could not place the coffin inside, so they left it to float away in the rain that fell suddenly and heavily that afternoon. The grave diggers threw down their shovels and walked away. But the strangest part of all, Chief Ayoka's body never decayed, not even a little. 3 months after he died, his skin was still as fresh as the day he took his last breath. He looked like a man sleeping, not like a man who had left this world. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a very long time. Before we dive into this mystery, drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from? Follow and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. This story is going places you are not ready for. To understand why the earth refused to swallow Chief Ayoka, you must first understand the kind of man he was. He did not start rich. He started clever. And in Emumu, clever without conscience is the most dangerous thing a man can be. When Ayoka was around 30 years old, still young and hungry, he discovered a method that worked so well, he used it for years. He would travel to nearby villages. He would find the poorest young men, men with children at home, men with sick mothers, men who had nothing but their 2 hands and their will to work. He would sit with them under a tree, speak softly, and make them an offer. "Come and work on my farm for 5 years, he would say, his voice low and kind. "After 5 years, I will give you your own full plot of cocoa farm. You will never be poor again. I swear it on my father's grave." The young men would look at each other. 5 years was a long time, but a plot of cocoa farm, that was a future. That was something to die for. They would shake his hand, they would follow him to Emumu, and they would walk. Oh, how they worked. 6 days a week, from the first light of dawn to the last thread of sunset. They cleared his land, they planted his crops, they harvested his cocoa and carried it on their backs to the market. 5 years would pass, and then, just when the time came to collect what was promised, Ayoka would go home and speak quietly to his wife, Tolani. "It is time," he would tell her. And Tolani, who knew exactly what her husband was, would walk outside and begin to scream. "They touched me. They forced themselves on me. These wicked men tried to do an abomination in this house."
The village would gather. The workers would stand there, confused and terrified, their mouths open, their hands shaking. "We did nothing. We have been here 5 years. We did nothing." But who would believe a group of poor men from another village over the wife of the richest man in Emumu? Ayoka would chase them out with righteous fury. No land, no pay, nothing, just shame and empty hands. He did this again and again. Different men, different villages, same trick, same results. That is how the foundation of his wealth was built, on the broken backs and stolen futures of men who trusted him. But as the years passed, word spread in these parts. People began to whisper. People from other villages began to warn their young men. The wife crying trick was getting old. So Chief Ayoka adapted. He had grown richer by now, a big compound and more cocoa than he could harvest alone. But greed does not know when to stop. Greed is a fire. The more you feed it, the bigger it burns. That was when Ayoka went deeper, much deeper.
He found a man in a forest far from Emumu. Nobody in the village knew the name of this man. Nobody wanted to know. They only knew what people said about that part of the forest, that the trees there grew crooked, that birds did not sing there, that even the wind passed through quickly as if afraid to linger. Ayoka came back from that forest a different man. He announced to the whole of Emumu that he was starting a lending business. People could come to him for loans. No collateral, no wahala. Just come with your need and he would give you money. The village was shocked. This was not the Ayoka they knew. Has the man changed? People asked. Has God touched his heart? They came. Of course they came. Farmers who needed money for seeds, traders who needed capital, fathers who needed to pay school fees. They all came, and Ayoka gave them money with a smile. When they could not repay on time, he would wave his hand gently. No problem. Take more time. You are my brother. What they did not know, what they could not see, was what happened every night after he gave out a loan. That night, while the borrowers slept, their spirit would rise from their body like smoke from a dying fire. It would travel in the darkness, cross the path between the living and the unseen, and arrive at Ayoka's farm. And there, in that dark and silent place, the spirit would walk. It would walk all night, planting, weeding, harvesting. It would pour its strength, its luck, its life essence, everything that made that person capable of succeeding into Ayoka's fields. When morning came, the borrowers would wake up feeling heavy. Their bodies would ache as if they had run all night. They would drag themselves through the day, confused about why they were always tired, why nothing they touched ever prospered, why their businesses kept failing, why their children kept falling sick. They would come back to borrow more money, and Ayoka would smile and give them more. These people never recovered. They spent the rest of their lives wondering what curse was upon them, never knowing that the man they borrowed from had stolen the very engine of their destiny. Chief Ayoka grew fat on the life force of broken people.
Tolani had been with Ayoka since the beginning. She was there when he was nobody. She was there when he used her voice to chase away innocent men. She had screamed those lies so many times she could no longer remember what the truth felt like. But she stayed, because he was her husband, because she had children with him, because in those early years he still looked at her like she mattered. Then he got rich, and rich men in Emumu do not stay with just one wife. He married a second woman, then a third. He built new rooms in the compound for them. He bought them new clothes, new cooking pots, new everything. And Tolani, who had built his empire with her own lies and her own sacrifice, was pushed aside like an old rapper. "After everything I did for you," she said to him one night, her voice quiet and dangerous, "I was the one beside you when you had nothing. I was the one who screamed for you. I was the one who helped you destroy those men. And now you treat me like I am nothing?" Ayoka looked at her with cold eyes. "Then leave," he said. And she did. Tolani packed her things and moved to a small house at the other end of Emumu. She took her children, 4 of them, the eldest being a boy named Kola, and she left. But the moment she walked out of that compound, Ayoka felt fear for the first time in years. Tolani knew everything. She knew about the workers. She knew about the loans. She had watched him perform rituals she had pretended not to see. She knew where he went at night. She knew the name of the man in the forest. If Tolani opened her mouth, everything would collapse. He waited 3 weeks. He watched her house. He watched her children go to school. He watched her settle into her new life. Then one night, he went to her. The next morning, Tolani was gone. Her children came home from school to find an empty house, cold food on the stove, and no mother. The village searched. They called her name. They checked every road, every bush path, every neighbor's house. Nothing. Tolani had simply vanished. Ayoka stood at the front of the search party, shaking his head, wiping fake tears from his face. "My poor children," he said. "Their mother has left them. God knows I tried." Then he brought his children back home with him. Nobody suspected a thing. But there was a secret room in Ayoka's compound, a room that was not on any plan, a room that nobody knew existed, a room behind the old store, sealed with a door made to look like a wall. Inside that room, Tolani was alive,
but only barely. Ayoka had used her the same way he used others, but worse. He had taken her life force and folded it into himself, stealing years from her body to add to his own. He used her knowing she would not report herself. He used her because she was the one person whose destruction would never be investigated. And in that dark room, Tolani sat, day after day, year after year, alive but not living, breathing but barely. Her 4 children, Kola, Sade, Tunde, and little Bisi, grew up thinking their mother had abandoned them.
Chief Ayoka died at 60 years old. He was found in his bedroom on a Tuesday morning. His eyes were closed. His hands were folded on his chest. He looked peaceful, like a man who had said all his goodbyes. Nobody knew exactly what happened. Some said his dark medicine simply expired, that there is a limit to how much evil a man can borrow from the universe before the universe takes it all back at once. Others said God, who sees everything, had simply said enough. Whatever the reason, Chief Ayoka was dead. His 7 children, 4 from Tolani and 3 from his other wives, came together. They did not agree on much in life, but they agreed on this: the burial must be grand. The man had been the biggest chief in Emumu. His funeral must match his name. Cows were slaughtered. A coffin of the finest mahogany was ordered from the city. Canopies were erected. A talking drum player came from 3 villages away. They buried him deep, 10 feet down, and covered the grave with concrete. That night, the village slept. The next morning, Kola, Tolani's firstborn, now a grown man of 30, walked into his father's parlor to drink water. He stopped. The mahogany coffin was sitting in the middle of the room, lid open. Chief Ayoka inside, looking exactly as he had the day before. Stiff, cold, perfectly preserved. Kola dropped his cup. He ran outside and screamed until the whole compound woke up. The second burial was quieter, but no less serious. They dug deeper. They poured more concrete. A pastor came and prayed for 2 hours. Third morning, coffin back in the parlor. By the 4th attempt, the village was no longer shocked. They were afraid. There is no name for the feeling of watching a dead man refuse to stay dead. On the 7th attempt, something strange happened at the gravesite. The diggers were barely 4 feet down when water started coming up from the earth. Cold, dark water, rising fast. They dug sideways, more water. They dug in a different spot entirely, water again. The sky, which had been clear, turned grey. Then rain began to fall. Hard, angry rain, the kind that has something to say. The grave diggers looked at each other. They looked at the coffin sitting on the ground beside them. One of the older men shook his head slowly. "The ground does not want him," he said. "Leave it." They left the coffin where it was. The rain carried it a few yards, rocking it gently before it settled against a mango tree at the edge of the compound. They woke up the next morning. The coffin was back inside, in the parlor, open. This went on for 3 months. 85 burials, if not more. Attempts in the forest, attempts in the next village, one attempt at sea, with iron chains tied around the coffin and heavy stones placed on top. The divers came back pale and sweating, saying the chains had opened themselves underwater and the coffin had floated back to shore on its own. They even tried to burn him. The wood would not catch fire. Every match died immediately. Every flame shrank back as if burned by cold. The firewood turned into snakes and scattered. The men ran. By the 3rd month, the village had had enough. The neighboring families, the distant relatives, the community elders, all of them gathered and made a quiet announcement. This man's children must handle this.
We did not make his choices. We are not responsible for his curse. Let his family bury him." And so the 7 children were left alone with their father's body. And the whole village of Emumu waited. The conflict split the village. Some said she had killed his father for money and the spirit was seeking revenge. Others said the chief was holding on to a secret that was too heavy for the earth to swallow. "Papa, what do you want?" Femi wailed one night, kneeling before the open box. "We have given you the best burial. We have spent all your inheritance on ceremonies. Please, rest." The children had stopped sleeping. Kola, the eldest, sat in the parlor every night with a lantern, watching the coffin. His 3 full siblings, Sade, Tunde, and Bisi, took turns sitting with him. His 3 half-siblings from the other wives mostly stayed in their rooms, arguing about what to do, what to sell, and whether their father had left any hidden money somewhere. It was on a Thursday night that the sound started. Screech, screech, screech. Kola sat up. The lantern flickered. "Did you hear that?" Bisi whispered. The sound was coming from the wall. A slow, deliberate scratching, like a fingernail being dragged across wood. Kola walked toward the sound. He pressed his palm flat against the wall of the old storeroom, a room they had never used, never opened, that had always been locked for as long as any of them could remember. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then, so softly they almost missed it, a voice. "Kola!" Kola stepped back so fast he knocked over his lantern. "Who is there?" he shouted. Nothing. He looked at his siblings. They looked at him. None of them could explain what they had just heard. But Kola knew that voice. He had not heard it in over 20 years. It was his mother's voice. They found it the next morning. They broke through with a hammer. The smell hit them first. Stale air, old wood, something like incense that had burned out long ago. Then their eyes adjusted to the darkness. It was a small room, and there, sitting in the corner on a bare wooden bench, wrapped in an old wrapper that had faded to grey, was a woman. She was thin, terribly thin, her skin like paper stretched over bone. Her hair was long and white, though she could not have been more than 60 years old. Her eyes were half open, seeing nothing, seeing everything. Bisi started screaming first. "Mama!" Kola could not move, could not speak. He stood at the broken wall and stared at the woman who had vanished when he was 9 years old. The woman whose name he had cried into his pillow every night for years after. The woman he had eventually decided must be dead. Tolani turned her head slowly toward the sound of her children's voices. Her lips moved. "I have been waiting," she whispered. They brought her water. They brought her food. Their hands were shaking. The 3 half-siblings stood at the broken wall, watching. Femi, the eldest son from the second wife, the one who had always seen himself as the true heir, crossed his arms. "How do we know she is not mad?" he said. "She has been in a room for years. Her mind is probably gone." "She said my name," Kola said quietly, without turning around. "She has not seen me in 20 years and she said my name." Tolani drank 3 cups of water before she spoke properly. When she did, her voice was weak but clear, like a radio finding its signal. She began to talk. She talked for a long time. She told them about the workers from the other villages, the ones promised cocoa farms and then chased away with false accusations. She named names. She named villages. She told them about the loans, the way Ayoka came home excited after each one, saying, "I got another one today." The way she had seen the borrowers years later, broken, poor, confused, their light gone out. She told them about the man in the forest, the one nobody named. She described the ritual she had witnessed through a crack in the wall, the things exchanged, the prices paid. And then she told them about herself. "He used me last," she said. "After he took everything from the others, he came for me. Because I knew too much. Because dead women don't talk." The room was completely silent. Even Femi had nothing to say. "We have to let her go," Bisi said. "We have to free her properly. That is the only way." "If we do that, we lose all our father's wealth," Femi started. "If we do that what?" Kola said. turning to face him fully. What exactly are we protecting? What inheritance? This compound was built on other people's pain. This money was taken from people who are still suffering. What are we protecting, Femi? Femi opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the floor. Nobody answered. They carried Tolani out of the secret room and into the open air. When the sunlight touched her face for the first time in over 20 years, she closed her eyes and did not move for a long time. Then she began to speak. She gave them names, villages, amounts, descriptions of men who had come to Ayoka's compound young and hopeful and left destroyed. She described workers who had given 5 years of their strength and received nothing. She described borrowers who had come for small loans and spent the rest of their lives wondering why they could not prosper. Kola wrote everything down in a thick notebook. Then the 7 children, all 7 of them, including Femi, who argued the least after he looked his mother in the face, began to make trips. They went to the nearby villages. They knocked on doors. They said, "Our father wronged your family. We are here to make it right." Many of those men were old now. Some had died. Their children or grandchildren answered the doors confused and suspicious. Some cried, some shouted, some slammed their doors, but most of them listened. The money went first, then the land. Plot by plot, acre by acre, the family's holdings were sold or transferred. Femi wept once, quietly, in private, but he did not fight it. Compensation was paid to the families of the workers. What could be found of the borrowers or their descendants received what the family could afford. It took everything. The cocoa farms, the rental properties in the city, the savings, the jewelry, all of it went. When it was done, the 7 children sat in the empty parlor with nothing left but the walls around them. And then Kola stood up and walked to the coffin. "We have paid the debt," he said quietly. "Now please, rest."
There was no music this time, just the 7 children, Tolani walking slowly beside them, and a plain wooden coffin being carried through the early morning silence to the graveyard. The gravediggers had come back, not because they were paid, but because word had spread through Emumu about what the family had done, and they wanted to see the end of the story. The grave was dug. No water rose from the ground. The sky was clear. They lowered the coffin. They covered it with earth, no concrete. When the last handful of soil was patted down, the village stood in silence. Nobody spoke. The next morning, Kola was the first one awake. He walked slowly to the parlor, his hands clasped, his eyes closed, preparing himself. He opened his eyes. The parlor was empty. Just the bare floor, the marks where the coffin had sat all those weeks, and morning light coming through the window. It was over. The family had nothing. Within a week of the final burial, the compound walls cracked in ways that could not be repaired. The roof of the main house sagged. Strange roots pushed up through the floors in rooms that had been sealed for years. The 7 children scattered. Some went to relatives, some started from the very bottom, learning trades, selling food at the market, doing work their father would have called beneath him. Tolani healed slowly, painfully. There were days she could not get out of bed, days when the weight of 20 years in that room pressed down on her body like something physical. But she healed. She had inherited her life back. That was the only inheritance worth having. People in Imumu still talk about the 85 burials. They tell it to their children when they ask why the abandoned compound at the edge of the village has no buyer, why no one will build on that land, why the grass there grows differently. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is still, some of the older residents say they can hear a sound coming from the direction of the graveyard. But those who know the full story say it is nothing to be afraid of. The earth has him now, they say. He is not going anywhere. He is simply reminding us. Reminding us of what? Never steal what you cannot carry to the grave.
Moral lessons. The father eats the forbidden fruit, and it is the children's teeth that set on edge. Ayoka never accounted for his sins while he was alive, so his children inherited the burden. 85 burials, public shame, and a wealth that vanished overnight. What a parent refuses to answer for, their children are forced to carry. When you help someone do evil, don't be surprised when that same evil turns around and chooses you as its next victim. Not every kindness is clean. Some are traps wearing a smile. The earth may be silent, but it never forgets. What you hide today can rise tomorrow louder than your voice.
Evil does not always punish the doer immediately. Sometimes it waits quietly, then knocks on the door of their children and generations after them. Chief Ayoka spent his life gathering stones he couldn't take with him, and those same stones became the anchors that kept him from resting. Which other moral lessons did you pick from this story? Let me know in the comments.